I'm Jackie LaFaro. People always say your name so people know who you are. I'm Jackie, and this is our 11th year. And I just want to take a few seconds to thank our sponsors, without whom we couldn't do all of this. So that's Bridgehampton National Bank, Douglas Elliman, who give us a free community day on Monday. So if you're available, come by. We have 5 great films, including that free solo film that you saw with Alex Honnold hanging off the cliff. So, and then we have Long and Matone, our new sponsors. They're our Audience Award sponsor, and People's United Bank. So thank you all very much for that sponsorship. We appreciate it. We are a not-for-profit, and I'm always told to make a little announcement that if you feel generous and you want us to continue, please keep us in your giving wishes. We wish you would keep us on your giving list. So thank you. So the way tonight is going to work, it's a little bit different from the way we typically do it. We are going to see a reel of the work, the lifetime career work of Sheila Nevins, who has brought the documentary film into the homes of thousands and thousands of people across this country. Didn't even know what docs were. As Sheila calls them, she calls them docus. But in any event, she is receiving tonight our Lumiere Career Achievement Award. And we are so honored to be able to honor her. So we're going to see a reel. Then Mark Levin, her chosen filmmaker, is going to come up and give Sheila, she's going to describe Sheila's life to you in so many words and so many seconds. And then they're going to have a conversation here for as long as it takes. When that's over, you're going to see 2 wonderful films. One that Mark made and Sheila executive produced, Triangle, Remembering the Fire, and you'll hear something very interesting in their conversation about that film. And then the second film, which is very dear to Sheila's heart, The Numbers on Grandpa's Arm. So the films are about an hour altogether, and that is our evening. So I hope I haven't forgotten anything. Let's look at Sheila's reel. Thank you. That was impressive, Sheila. And that was only a small smattering of the work that you've done to bring documentary film into television, into the homes of millions. So documentary filmmakers are thrilled everywhere. Let me just introduce Mark Levin, who is an award-winning filmmaker, and among his honors are the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance, for the Camera d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, 3 national Emmys, 4 DuPont Columbia Awards, one of America's most respected filmmakers. His productions include Slam, Brick City, the Emmy winner, Thug, Life in D.C. for HBO, and one of the films that we will see tonight is Mark's film Triangle, Remember the Fire. Mark, can you come up, please?
Well, it's tough to follow that, really, Sheila. I mean, I'm recovering, and Sheila's work has had a profound effect, not only on the audiences that have watched HBO, but on my personal life. So let me just say a few quick things before we give out the Lumiere Award for Lifetime Achievement. First, I think it is appropriate. The Lumiere brothers were obviously pioneers in the history of motion pictures, and their name itself means light. And when I think of light and pioneers, it seems very appropriate, Sheila, that this honor would be bestowed on you. I happened to look at the first film they ever made in 1895, and it was a 90-second film of factory workers leaving their factory. their photographic factory. But what's amazing is it's mostly women, and it looked so much like some of the women you're going to see in the Triangle film in a few minutes. But the idea that this first film is of working people leaving a factory, an image that's actually probably reappeared in many of your films, and the idea of being a pioneer. Because as you've heard before, as you've just seen in some of the work here, Sheila really was a trailblazer. And I can say that from kind of first-person testimony. I was there. I saw this as she lit the way and kind of fought her way for a new place for documentary films. There's no doubt about that. We've heard a lot about the golden age of documentaries, and this festival right here is a perfect example of it. There are documentary festivals now all over the world. And this embrace and acceptance of the documentary form, it never would have happened without Sheila. So let me just say a few things from kind of my personal perspective, because many people have asked, okay, so what's it like to work with Sheila? And what do you have to do to pitch an idea to Sheila? All right, well, I kind of break it down into three chapters. First, there is the pitching of the idea, and all I would say is you go in thinking of one film, you come out thinking of another film. Sometimes it's a variation, a new permutation, a new insight on the idea you had. Sometimes it is a totally different idea, something that you never even thought you'd be involved in. Sheila invests herself emotionally in every film you've seen there and the characters you see there. She's not an executive that is aloof. She is an executive that gets involved in the lives not only of the filmmakers but of the characters you see on the screen. So you're spending hours and hours having discussions. And as you've seen and I'm sure heard, I mean, Sheila has always had a place for the underdog, the wounded, the handicapped, the oppressed. Yet, as you get into the working environment and you're going back and forth, what's amazing is sometimes she even questions the motives of what you think are the most sympathetic characters in your film. So you go through hours of, okay, putting it together. Here we are. Here is the first cut. And then I'm sure many filmmakers who've worked with Sheila have shared this, the dreadful question, after all these months of work together, what is this film about? That is the reaction to the first cut, and that can be a chilling and quite devastating to the filmmaker until you get to know Sheila and realize her working methodology. And before I get into that unique free association working methodology, the third part I would say is, okay, you've finished it, you've got visions of all the places this film is going to go, and you get a call, we're changing the title. Sheila is a title fanatic and has spent as much time sometimes on what the title is as what the cut is. So once you survive that, you become familiar with a creative collaboration that is really unique. From my own personal experience, I've never worked with an executive in film or television that works the way Sheila does. And what I mean by that is you might go in with a cut and never get beyond the first 2 minutes of what is in your cut. Because you are lost in a kind of stream of consciousness dialogue that at times can be quite confusing, and you're wondering, wait a second, what are we doing? I thought we were making this film. And yet, when you look back on it, you realize the kind of hidden jewels and nuggets that are the pointers to where this project is going. And I'll use an example. I've done probably 15 or 16 films with Sheila. The first one where the real impact was Gang Wars back in '93, Gang Wars Banging in Little Rock. And I remember getting a note from Sheila. In fact, we made a little card and put it over the Steenbeck that said, "Forget the message, get the sizzle." And that was kind of a smack in the face at that moment. Obviously, street gangs were a phenomena, and I remember when Sheila asked Daphne and I to go down to Little Rock, Arkansas, and I have to admit, I didn't really want to do it. And yet, part of the methodology is she's got a sensory device somewhere that just senses the zeitgeist. Where are things going? Little did I know that us going down to Little Rock, doing Gang War, Banging in Little Rock, getting caught in the middle of that drive-by would kind of change the course of my career and the kind of films that I would make. And it was all part of the America Undercover series that Sheila did back in the '90s, which really was the bridge. Network television, conventional documentaries were still stuck in, I guess, what you would call the nature news ghetto. And Sheila was the one that saw that there's so much more to the documentary form, both stylistically and subject-wise, that you could touch subjects that had been considered taboo. And not only was that liberating, for filmmakers, but in many ways, I've often thought about how it kind of pointed a direction for HBO itself. I mean, when I think of Oz, The Wire, The Sopranos, Sex and the City, and I think of some of the projects I and other filmmakers worked on America Undercover, I see all the seeds for those subjects, those stories set a few years earlier by the documentary division. And Sheila's efforts, not only creatively in the filmmaking, but also in the marketing and the position of the documentary. That for really a good decade, we were part of the America Undercover experience, which after 9/11 really, Sheila, morphed in a way that I'd never anticipated, and Sheila and I both kind of rediscovering our Jewish roots, which the film that you're going to see tonight, Triangle, both films you're going to see tonight, actually are somehow part of that work. And then finally, after the crash of 2008, the Great Recession, it's funny because for years, my father, who was a good friend of Sheila's, had been hawking her, you got to do something on the political economy. It's all about the economy. Why won't HBO ever touch anything that has to do with the political economy? And Sheila for years had said, go back to PBS and go back to Bill Moyers. We don't do that here at HBO. Somehow, and I guess it was kind of the inversion also of her obsession with titles, we were sitting talking, Sheila, I don't know if you remember this, about the clothes you were wearing. And you were kind of remarking about how some of them were made in Vietnam, some were made in China, some in Cambodia, and what's happened to our manufacturing. And I remember looking at Daphne Pinkerson, my producing partner, and saying, I mean, come on, the U.S. has been losing manufacturing for 20 years. You want to do a thing on schmata? And you looked at me and said, schmata? That's a great title. And I said, yeah, well, what's the movie? And you said, don't worry, you'll figure it out. So that was the moment I figured I finally figured you out, was just get the title first instead of having it changed at the end of the game. But we went on to make a series of films. One was out here on Long Island, Hard Times Lost on Long Island, and Class Divide after that, that did find a way to tell some of the story, the human story, of how these global economic forces are impacting all of our lives. So all of this adds up to that I want to thank Sheila for the filmmakers, me being one of them, who she has so influenced, supported, and impacted. And tortured, yes. Well, okay. She's forcing me to share one embarrassing moment, and my wife is here also. And I can't remember exactly the term that the New York Times described some of your undiplomatic moments. But Sheila is unedited, unexpurgated. And there was a time where we had a premiere, and she was up here at the podium, and she had this book on bonobos. And she said, she made the announcement in front of a crowd like this that she was giving this book to me because I was part of this primate group, the bonobos. I was a little embarrassed at that moment. And I have to say, when I went home and read the book, I was even more embarrassed because I realized it was true. But all of this is to say that as all the filmmakers who've worked with you, I think would share in thanking you, in forging this path, in bringing the documentary form to where it is. And on a personal level, I feel Sheila is part family. She and my old man used to spend hours late at night trading war stories. My father was just fascinated. He knew she was a genius early on, but he was amazed by the contradictions in her personality. And I mean, part of that would be the empathy and compassion for the underdog, for the wounded, and yet at the same time you could be in the editing room and that character, all of a sudden she's suspecting that we're being manipulated and they're really hustling us, and let's not shed a tear for them. And the murderer that's over there in the other bin, it's like, wow, I really feel for him. So there are some contradictions which some have noted in terms of the fact that her prestige work, which is unparalleled in terms of the Emmys and the Oscars and the Peabodys, yet was also part of Real Sex and Taxi Cab Confessions. She was not going to be boxed in to any one place, any one style, and she challenged all of us to be as open and as flexible. So I thank her personally for having such a profound influence in my career. And I just leave you with one last anecdote. There was a young filmmaker that had worked on Training Day, a young African-American filmmaker that made a film called Bastards of the Party, Cleabone Sloan. And I'd gotten to know him a little and introduced him to HBO. And I ran into him at a party one night in Hollywood, and I remember him coming up to me and saying, I've met every executive in Hollywood and New York. Sheila Nevins is the only one that's got some balls. She is courageous. She fought for us. She is well deserving of this honor of the Lumiere Lifetime Achievement Award. Sheila, thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. I mean, Mark, you can introduce me anytime, any place. Mark's father, Al, was a great inspiration to me. He was a kind of communist kind of producer, and I grew up that way with my family. And I think the underdog, the apple didn't fall far from the tree with Mark. Mark has remained loyal. I'm not at HBO anymore, and one realizes who really stands by one when one no longer has films to give out. And I would like to say that Mark is not only a talent, but a friend. But you're not getting this, Mark. But thank you. I mean, what else can I say? I mean, you want me to have a conversation with myself? No. Oh. I often do talk to myself. No, I'm happy to sit and talk to Mark. Is that good?
What are you going to do next?
Okay. Do I have to carry this?
No,
All right. Thank you. Can you hear? Oh my God, yes. One chair?
Yeah, no, you sit down.
No, you have to sit too.
Yeah,
Oh, me first?
Yeah, sure.
Ladies first?
each other's laps.
yeah, we can.
There you go.
Well, you said just about everything there is to say. I
No,
mean,
come on.
More?
I mean, I think we should make this a little like, our creative sessions, which is free.
I do all the talking and you listen?
There you go. Exactly. Okay. So let's start with just what I would say if we met this evening at the bar, which is just, okay, it's almost exactly a year. I think 2 weeks, it will be a year since the announcement was made, of you leaving HBO. Just, how's it going?
Very tough. It's hard to leave a place you've grown up in. And it's hard to be, I would say not really unemployed because I'm doing 6 shows for them, but it's hard to be, not have the power of the purse. Is that too real to talk about?
No.
It's very interesting. I was talking to, I don't know your last name, Judge, but we were talking before in the green room about how when one loses the power of one's judgeship or one's giveaway or one's decision-making, one becomes, one has to face the fact that maybe people liked you for what you could give, and maybe a lot of people who nodded really thought, oh, fuck her, So it's been a very difficult year.
Uh-huh.
And I am looking for contributions for psychiatrists. Are there any doctors in the house? No, that's just a joke. Good.
But, that's interesting because I always fantasized, and that's why I asked you, that there's the balance of that between not having to deal with so much of the bullshit.
Oh, but I loved it. Oh, but I mistook the power of the purse for acceptance and excellence. So I really enjoyed knowing that I was excellent. Thank you. No, it's just difficult. I mean, haven't a lot of you just sort of lost power? It's not a young crowd. You do something and then you don't do it anymore, and then, you get a facelift and nobody talks to you. It's a good one, but nobody talks to me.
Well, now you brought up facelift, which of course.
I don't want to discuss it, though.
Well, it's the first chapter of your book.
I know, but the book is old. I only brought the book because it's about the Triangle Fire. I didn't really want to
Well,
discuss
I love
my
the book.
facelift.
No,
you
but,
do?
Well, I love the book because it has a part of your humor
I'm
that
very
I think
funny.
a lot
Yeah,
a
I'm
lot of
very
people
funny.
do not appreciate.
Because I'm very sad, I'm very funny. In other words, I don't think I could be funny without being terribly sad. I think life is shit. I think people suffer. I think it's unfair. And therefore, you have no choice. You either go to church or synagogue and believe, or you make jokes. So I prefer to make jokes. Anyway, I like to sleep late on Sunday and Saturday.
Well, I shared with you that, my wife who's sitting here wondered what happened when I read that chapter of your son and you pulling the tail off the gerbil. And it just had me howling in my loft. But I have to admit, I've always known you've had a sense of humor, but I didn't realize
You think I
as
should
an
have done
author.
stand-up?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Do you think I belong on the Catskills?
Well, I think that's one of the great things that a lot of filmmakers who are intimidated by you.
Who are they?
It's a who's who of the independent film community.
But now they intimidate me.
Well, I'm saying I don't think they understood that you do have a sense of humor, and they took everything literally in meetings with you, and and some were traumatized. I never heard this phrase of describing you because I never
know
thought-
people I've traumatized?
The dominatrix.
How exciting!
The dominatrix of docs. I never heard that one.
You never heard that?
I had never heard that one.
Well, I did a lot of sex programming, and I learned the word, documatrix, and then I just sort of adopted it to dominatrix to documatrix. Is that okay?
Okay, so let's.
There are safe, but in all those shows there are safe words.
Right.
Like enough. Could say enough.
Dianu.
Did you
That-
expect this to be a serious conversation about the meaning of documentaries and the profundity of, you know, showing the down and trodden and the sad. And is that what you wanted to talk about?
No, but I wanted to talk, I mean, you just brought up real sex. You know, what about this idea of high-low? You know, that you...
High-low?
Yeah, that you
I
have
believe
gone...
that low is high and high is low. I mean, I went to Barnard, and I could read Chaucer, and I could read D.H. Lawrence, and I could read all kinds of books. And then when I got to television, R-rated was, it can't be in docu. And I thought, no, why not? As long as children are not being hurt and it's consenting adults, sex is entertaining, it's part of life. Let's do, so we did real sex, we did G-string divas, we did taxi cab confessions, we did erotic reality television, which probably gave birth in some way to reality TV.
Absolutely, it did.
I think so, because it was popular, but it was true to form. You know, if people were making love in the back of a taxi, it was for real.
Right.
If they hated each other, it was for real. They didn't script for real.
But you know, you got a lot of blowback from that. You know, people saying, "What are you doing?" You know, down in the gutter. You know, you got these Sundance winners, you got these Oscar nominees, and then you're doing this kinky stuff.
Yeah, I did. I like kinky stuff. I mean, I think it's part of life. I think what's kinky is not having health insurance. What's kinky is dying on a battlefield. I'll get very emotional about it. Two people having sex on television and enjoying it is not kinky. It's not kinky. If no one is abusing someone, it's not kinky. What's kinky and vulgar and disgusting is deprivation. Okay? I'm running for office, actually.
Did it ever occur to you when, you know, think of some of the films that we've made, you know, from mob stories. Like when I look at mob stories and Joe Dogs and kind of the absurdist nature of some of these mobsters, and then I think of The Sopranos. I think of all the films we did behind bars. I think of Oz. I think of the gang films.
Yeah, but I never thought of that until you said it today. I really don't take credit for HBO.
I'm not saying credit, but
I'd like to, if you'd like me to. No, I don't think so. I think that fiction has always had the freedom to go to those places.
But it
But
didn't.
fact
You
didn't.
went first. Gang War was on 9 years before The Wire went on.
Okay, I invented the cotton gin. I'll take it. Can I copyright it and make money on it?
I don't know about that.
Oh, okay. All right. No, I don't really think that.
Well, so many people have asked, okay, I'm
What's she
going
really
in to
like?
meet Sheila. How do I pitch her?
Truthfully. No bullshit.
What was it that you looked for? You know, you went, you know, so many people have pitched you over the last 38 years. What did you look for?
Story. Something that hasn't been told before. I mean, you know, let's talk about class divide.
Okay.
Okay. The last film, one of the last films I did at HBO, Mark did, called Class Divide. Where'd it come from? It came from the fact that there was such great economic disparity in the United States. I mean, somebody said, do something about the 1%. And I thought, what am I going to do? I don't know, 1%, I'll go to Wall Street. And I was sitting in a park one day, waiting to see my son on 10th Street, 11th Avenue. And on one side was the Avenue School. On the other side was the Elliott Housing Projects. And I thought, I have to call Mark. I really did think that, Mark, in that park, because I knew your father would have done this film. I knew there was a film there. I didn't know it would be as good as the film you made. I didn't know you'd find the story so elegantly, and Rosa and all those things. But I knew that in that park that was in the center, and still New York, and in Chelsea that was moving and moving and moving into something else, that there were the very poor and the very rich, and they shared the swings in that park, which seemed to me to be about America. And then if you see just one film, well, see two. I think you should see Class Divide, because I think it's really an extraordinary documentary and one of my proudest. And the other one is Little Sammy that you saw here. Sammy, I was terrified of Sammy. Disability has always scared me. My mother was disabled. She had Raynaud's and scleroderma and no hands, and people made fun, and you know, all that kind of stuff. But Sammy had progeria. He's now dead. He died at 17. Both his parents are doctors, tried to save him as best they could. But you couldn't save a kid with progeria because it's premature aging, and they just age at a rapid rate. But by studying these children, you learn something about aging and the process and the possible palliative care for it. So he was, in many ways, an experiment. He was a son, and he was a film subject. And Life According to Sam, if you're ever feeling sad about yourself, watch that. You can watch Mark's first, and then watch the other one second.
Well, how would you describe your working methodology? Because it really is unique. I mean, you know, you do have a much less corporate, a much more free association way of trying to kind of identifying where a film is going, where a project's going, what interests you.
I had a great freedom at HBO because documentaries were not important when I started. It was a throwaway, and my background had been theater. I'd gone to the Yale Drama School. You know, I had a lot of, I was a director there. I couldn't get a job in the theater. It was in the 60s. No one was hiring women to be directors. And I sort of landed on these television jobs because I needed a salary. And I wound up hearing about a job at HBO in documentaries. And I thought documentaries were like Winston Churchill, right. World War II. You know, they were for very cerebral people who read books. And then I noticed that certain films were doing very well, that were fiction films, like Bob and Ted and Carol and Alice, hence Real Sex. Or, you know, whatever was popular then in the movies, I would see people were watching, and they weren't watching Winston Churchill. And I thought, well, why can't I borrow from fiction and find these stories in the real world? Why am I stuck with history and stock footage and narrators? Why can't real people tell their own stories like they do in movies? And why can't the stories be broad and about a lot of other things? Hence, you know, Down and Out and Long Island, is that what it's called?
Well, hence
But you mean, did I
America
have a
Under...
theory? Nobody cared what I did. When they started caring, I started having a harder time.
Right, but even your, you know, your team that you put together, you know, Nancy and Lisa and Sarah, you know, I think your approach to material was unique. It was more like a creative artist approaches material. In other words, so many people, even Sanjay, who we're working with now, you know,
Yeah.
you go and prepared, you've got, you know, an outline, you've got you know, a subject, and you blew it all up.
I'm easily bored. I probably have, had I been diagnosed and, you know, they didn't have that diagnosis when I was born with the Lumiere brothers or whatever. But the thing is that the diagnosis that I would have had would probably be attention deficit disorder. And I think that even though I went to the right schools and I did everything, I had to work extra hard to concentrate. I'm bored very easily. And I think that I took that into my job, which was, I don't want to bore anybody. You know, I'm very aware that there are 3 empty seats there and 2 over there. I know my audience. I know I didn't sell out. I know Winston Churchill did not sell out.
So when did you realize, you know, because you and I connected probably in the beginning
Early.
of the, late 80s or beginning of 90s. When did you realize that you were kind of onto something?
Oh, I still don't know. Was I?
Oh, come on.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the sex programming I thought was necessary and popular. I knew that there were things people didn't talk about. Being gay. I knew they didn't talk about that. I knew they didn't talk about poverty. I knew they didn't talk about depression. I knew that the things that people didn't talk about could be what these shows could talk about.
Right, but I mean, I remember there were, you know, you were very conscious of who was watching, like you say, the audience.
Terribly
You were conscious of
right.
ratings. You were conscious of where HBO, and as in my memory, and you correct me if I'm wrong, was that some of these documentaries started getting an audience, a real audience.
Yes, I would, you know, when I was in college and they would post the grades, I was the first there. While they were posting them, I would be there because I wanted to know if I had done well in a test because I had to work so hard, so much harder than other girls in that school. It was all girls. I don't know if it's still all girls. But I had to work very, very hard. I had to work very hard to get a grade, to get a good grade. And even though I got B's, my roommates got A's. I couldn't break that thing. I just couldn't concentrate. You know, I would just phase out in some way. I saw fiction doing well, and fact, you know, winning awards, doing nicely. Everybody could do it. And I just wanted to do well. I wanted to get a good grade in television. How do you get a good grade in television? You don't bore people. How do you not bore people? You talk about things they want to hear about. You know.
Right, but I mean, I think you're kind of downplaying your own ferocity.
Well, that's why I need a psychiatrist.
I'm saying your ferocity in fighting for, even though it was kind of a backwater for a while, fighting for what you thought would work. I mean, you did go to Met. Why you know, Cleveland Sloan told me, you know, that story is because, you know, there was resistance.
Well, I mean, I sort of created a little off-Broadway part of HBO. It didn't cost as much as other shows. I could do what I wanted. Bosses kept changing. Every time a boss changed, I asked for more money. You know, it was like, you know, I said, I got to go. I have another offer. Lies, lies, lies. But I mean, it worked. Lies work.
Lies work.
I'm so sorry to tell you that. Lies work.
We're living through that right now.
Yeah, but mine were women lies to get into the man's universe. Those were different.
All right, well, let's
We're talking
talk about that.
a man's
All right,
universe.
well, you've brought up,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
Maureen Dowd wrote, you know, a major piece in the New York Times on this subject. Well, share with us some of your
Oh, is there
thoughts
more?
about.
Are we going to talk more?
Well, you brought it up. I didn't bring it up.
Haven't you had enough of us?
Come on, you brought it up.
Oh, I feel like you're getting bored. Oh, good. What do you want more?
No, I was just
You want me
saying.
to say I'm great?
No,
You
we're
want me to say I changed the world?
no,
You
we're
want me to
talking about
say-
women in a men's world. We're talking
I
about.
just, yeah, okay. Women and men's real tough. I fought hard. I cried a lot. I worked hard. I took a lot of crap. I took a lot of pinches. I took a lot of crap. I was a pretty young thing, and I did what I had to do so that you could get a job.
Well, I always felt. Yeah. I always felt kind of privileged being a man in your world. You know, you did have very strong female executives surrounding you. You had a team.
I did.
And you were a trailblazer, you know. You were out there. In your own... what my advice to filmmakers always was who were approaching you is be open, be flexible, and be open to collaborate. Now that you're out there, I'm curious, you know, the other side of the coin, I understand
Well, remember
losing
I
the
said-
power of funding, but what
Yeah.
about being free to do what you want?
Well, I mean, I have a non-compete with HBO for a while, so I can't do anything else. I have a daydream film
End of
I
this
wanna do.
conversation.
Do you want to do this film? I have a film. Maybe somebody here, anybody here wealthy? I want to do a Khashoggi film. I want you to make it. I want you to take 10 well-known journalists, shoot them in their offices, reading just things that he wrote, and we'll broadcast it somewhere on the anniversary of his death. Because we don't know what he stood for, and we don't know how valuable freedom of the press is, and that would be a show about freedom of the press. So will you do that?
Well, I think we've accomplished our goal because this is literally how
You
a
make
number of
that?
projects have started.
No, but I think it's a very simple film to make. But I really feel strongly that we know a man walked into an embassy where he should have been protected, and they chopped him up in little pieces, and now we're shaking hands with those people. So now what is this about? Who was this man? You could have Maureen Dowd, you could have Nick Kristof. These people would read for you in a minute. Wouldn't be an expensive film. It could be the first film produced by the Doc Fest.
Hamptons Doc Festival.
What do you think?
I think it's...
I want to do it because I think it's really important that young people know that it wasn't just that a man went in there who was a Muslim and didn't come out again, but that he stood for something which is essential to democracy, which is the ability to say what you think and to write things. And I think these journalists would welcome a chance to read from his writings.
I have to tell you, I mean, I
It's a
think
good
it's
idea,
a great idea, and
Let's
having
do it.
seen that high
Well,
five...
that's how ideas happen.
That
I'm
is
sitting there and
exactly
I'm
it.
thinking, and I look at you and I think Mark could do it. Where would he get the financing? How do we do it? It wouldn't cost very much. It wouldn't cost a lot.
no.
And it would win awards.
I'm ready to be recruited, and certainly after seeing Putin and the prince high-five each other,
Yeah.
that,
Throw up.
like two mob bosses.
Okay. I had enough.
All right,
I think I had enough. I'd like to read something that relates to the
okay,
picture.
so
Is that
let's
okay?
just make a segue into,
Oh, you want to make a segue?
yes,
What about
I'm
a direct
making a
cut?
segue.
How
I'm
about
making a
cut?
segue. Hard cut? Okay, no dissolve, no
cut?
fade out. Hard cut.
Mark,
I'm
even though
deferring
you
to
don't
you.
work for me anymore, let's make it a hard cut.
You got it.
Okay, all right. So Mark was doing this film called Schmata, and the word came up at a meeting. And Schmata, I remembered when we went down to the firehouse, everybody said, "You can't call it Schmata, no one will know what it meant." And I went around to all the firemen down at the firehouse that had sent the a fire engine out, but it couldn't go high enough to the floor to save the women that had to jump out the window. In any case, I asked them all what the word schmata meant, and then nobody knew. And I said to Mark, "Nobody knows the word." He said, "Well, maybe that's not a good title." I said, "No, it's a very good title." Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. So now, I discovered while working on schmata that in addition to it being a really wonderful film, that my grandmother had always been crying about a sister that came here and that had died in a fire. And I didn't know. She was a little senile, and I didn't really know. But suddenly, when we were working on this film, and Mark and Daphne got to the part about the Triangle fire, I wondered if maybe that was the fire that my grandma had cried about her sister about. And so I think Daphne said there was a list of women who had died, or people who had died, mostly women, in that fire. Up until 9/11, that was the major industrial tragedy in New York City. And so I didn't know my grandma's maiden name. My grandma was long dead, and my father was dead, but I had an uncle who was about 90. And I called him and I said, "Uncle Seymour, what was Grandma's maiden name?" And he said, "Gitlin." And I said, "Where did Grandma live?" He said, "Well, we all lived at, I think it was 116 Spring Street." So I called Daphne. She looked it up, and sure enough, we found my great aunt who had died in the Triangle fire. She had lived at 116 Spring Street, and I had to get her death records in order to put it in the book. And so I wrote her a letter. So I'm going to read the letter, and then I'm leaving, okay? All right, here, you want to hold it?
Right.
I don't know how to do this. It's short. It's not a long letter.
You need glasses?
You think, of course I need glasses. I have my First of all, my glasses have to be dirty in order to use them, and yours look too clean. Okay, this was the letter to my great aunt. Great Aunt Cecilia, Mount Zion Cemetery, Section 43, Queens, New York, United States of America. Dear Great Aunt Celia, it's nearly 100 years since your tragic death in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire on March 25th, 1911. But it's just today that I discovered you really existed and died in the infamous Triangle fire. It hit me hard, and I cried for you, and yet I never met you. I had heard that Grandma Fanny's younger sister had died in a fire, yet it always seemed like family folklore. My father was born some 3 years later, and occasionally your death would come up in family conversations, but I'm sorry to say only briefly. Grandma Fanny's eyes would tear up, and then we would go on to hot chicken soup or stuffed cabbage, and some relative from the other side would try to coax me to try some sweet and sour Russian food that I had really no interest in. So here I am working on a documentary called Schmata. The film is about the fall of the Garment Center as a microcosm of the fall of industrial America. The producer mentioned immigrant labor and the fire. I said, "Mark, I think I had a great aunt who died in it." "Really?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "Well, there's a list of all who died," he said. "Oh," I said, "but I don't know my grandmother's maiden name. She was born in Russia, and she married my grandfather there. I'll ask my Uncle Seymour." I said, "My father's dead. Uncle Seymour is my grandmother's only living child." "Uncle Seymour," I asked later that night, "did you know Grandma Fanny's maiden name?" "Gitlin," he said without hesitation. Gitlin. I spelled it. No, 2 T's. "And what was her dead sister's name, the one who died in the fire?" "I don't know," Uncle Seymour said, "but my name was supposed to be like hers." Uncle Seymour is sharp as a tack at 84. He says his grief-stricken mother left the United States several months later to go to Belarus because she had to tell her mother, Lipska, that her youngest daughter was dead. There were only telegraph wires then. Grandma spoke only Yiddish.
and no one in the Western Union Telegraph Office understood how to write it. Regardless, she was convinced her mother would die if she was alone when she found out that Celia was dead. So Grandma Fanny took the 9-day trip back to Russia. My uncle said she didn't know she was 2 months pregnant with my father. Neighbors on the Lower East Side had collected money for her trip, and she gave birth to my father in Russia. She stayed with her mother for 2 years before returning to America. Pogroms had broken out in Belarus, and Grandma Fanny and her newborn son hid in her mother Lipska's grocery store basement for 2 years. For reasons Uncle Seymour didn't know, his grandmother died during her daughter Fanny's stay. Maybe it was grief over your death, Celia, that killed your mother. Who knows? Well, that's the history. Your history is best we can tell it. Your mother mourned you. The factory listed you as Selina Gitlin, but we knew at the morgue that it was our Celia Gitlin. On the death certificate, it was correct. Celia from Spring Street. You spoke no English, neither did anyone in the family. Immigrants' names were up for grabs. Dear Aunt Celia, you died at 17. The fire was on the 25th of March. Did you lie there suffering on Green Street? Did you die immediately? Did your corpse lie alone on the curb? The death notice said your skull was fractured. Did you jump? Of course your sister Fanny got you the job at the shirt factory in America. She summoned you from Russia and said that you could be rich someday and meet a good man in America. She said you could share their one-room apartment until your prince came to save you. There was plenty of room for you there. It was a big room. The bathtub was in the kitchen, but don't worry, Celia, it had a curtain for privacy. You came alone on a ship in early November 1910. You brought a samovar and a small sewing machine. The samovar wound up with me. I have it. I never asked where it came from. Now I know. I wish I could have met you at Ellis Island, if only for a moment, for you died 5 months later. That's what it says on your death certificate, Aunt Celia. Did you try the doors? Were you trampled by other women? Did you jump from the window because the exit doors were locked and the working girls couldn't smoke? Did you smoke? You were just a little girl. Who taught you to sew? I'm left-handed. I'm terrible at sewing. Do I look like you? Did you think any of the thoughts I thought at 17? What did you pack for lunch that day? Could you ever forgive your sister, my Grandma Fanny, for bringing you to America? Did you walk to work that day, a 16-hour work day, a 7-day work week? Were you tired that Saturday, or did you think you were lucky to have a job in this shirt sweatshop? I want to know, and I want you to know how sad I am that you died so young. Was it scary alone on the boat to America? Did the sewing machine and samovar smell of old Russia? Were you proud to go to your new job? Did you audition for the Triangle Boss with your Russian sewing machine? Did you ever know love? You were certainly beloved. Celia, I mourn for you, for the lack of safety in the treatment of immigrants. I'm outraged and panic when a crane kills a worker, or there's a senseless fire in a nightclub, or when an immigrant is ruthlessly deported. For I, your grandniece, am the child of immigrants. My father was born in Russia. Celia, I think I see the ghost of you. I see the babushka pulling back your kinky long hair so that it won't be caught in the sewing machine. Uncle Seymour's name is like yours. Uncle Seymour, Celia. We feel you, Celia, in our hearts as a relative who owns a piece of our being. Sheila, Celia. I visit your grave at Mount Zion Cemetery and place a stone for you from all of us. I'm not religious, Celia, but I believe in remembering. I want to tell you how sorry I am that you lost your life. My heart aches for you and for all the young immigrant girls who lost their lives to greed on that day in March. March 25th, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. May all of you women rest in peace. With all my love and memory, fondest, your grandniece, Sheila. And here's her death certificate. Thank you. Thank you. Are we finished? Okay.